Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and I'd like to start this video and this new series out with a shout out to one of my commenters, Daniel Lopez. I guess it's Lopez. We're gonna say it's Lopez. You can correct me in the comments with some sort of pronunciation key. People who just started don't really understand the game's lingo entirely, so beginners get less confused. Maybe some series like a quick overview of every unit in X element would be nice. Alright, well that is a tall order and just a little bit of an oxymoron, but I'm gonna do my best. A lot of talk about Earth lately, so let's start with that. First, we've got King Bradley. So King Bradley is a slash unit. He's a tank buster, but he's also a DPS, and he really manipulates both chaining in a number of ways. He has really good counters as well, and just really good assured damage, and kind of difficult to deal with across the board. This is, even moving forward, probably the overall strongest individual unit in the game, and I have a video going into more detail about him that you can check out. Rolgia is not a unit that I'm super familiar with, because what I do know about him I'm not super excited about. He is interesting in the Earth element in that he's one of their only UR gunners, so interesting on certain maps, as most gunners are. But one of the interesting things about him personally is that he's a bit more of a support. He has the ability to give himself hate down, which if he's not being super aggro, well, it's 6, so that's... I don't want to explain how hate works in this video, but that'll give you like 3 turns of not being priority, or 3 attacks of not being priority. And if he goes for more of this kind of... Maybe it's in his sub job? Oh, booster shot. Yeah. So he's got a bunch of supportive skills. He's got some healing skills. So he's not really a DPS, but he can do damage, and he is a good ranged unit. My feeling is, though, like, I don't know, it's kind of conflicting to be a support and a ranged unit, because if you prioritize damage, then you're rarely going to be supporting if you have good range. It's hard to do both of those things at once. Again, he's kind of a confusing unit. He is a 100 cost unit, so he is powerful. It's just he's a little strange. Resnick the Hoppy is a lot like King Bradley. She is a 90 cost unit. She is limited to Lunar Celebration, so she's on the banner with More the Merrier. And she is really like an anti-tank Swiss Army knife. Her damage isn't nearly as high. She's not really a DPS in the same way that Bradley is, and she doesn't have the CT up shenanigans, but she does a lot of the same things that he does and better. She can also remove courage where he can't, but really anything that's going to make a tank more survivable, she can deal with. Not a lot of those things at the same time, but for different situations, she has the skills to deal with a lot of different tanks. She's also kind of evasive. She's in that like semi-evasive, probably the least evasive unit on the evasion team kind of thing. And I often substitute her in on my evasion teams for Catone when courage isn't allowed. Uriel. Uriel is a fist unit. She is probably she's definitely the strongest Earth strike unit. She is also particularly powerful as an anti-missile unit, which is kind of a niche that Strike in general excels at, so that's good for her. She's also pretty tanky. She has courage, and she's also quite powerful offensively, but a bit short range, as the strike implies. Queen Macherie has really wide-ranged attacks through Arithmetician. She also has a really strong Earth Break on her LB, so she can break through Earth resistance teams, like wind teams, that kind of stuff. Not saying that you want to run her into a wind team, but she can stop that from taking over taking you over on defense. So that kind of makes her a good combination with Bradley, but she also has some heals that she's probably not going to use because she's more of a DPS unit, and just generally pretty good. One of the better units. Noctis is an oddball. He's kind of a hybrid unit in that he has a magical sub-job that gives him hate, gives him kind of the ability to generate hate and be a tank. He also has a lot of warp skills, which is very flavorful for him, so he can do some nutty things getting around the map as a support and as an offensive unit, but he's not necessarily a DPS. It's really hard to know what to describe him as, but like Sephiroth, he does have pretty high native elemental resistances just going into it, so he can be built really easily, or especially easily, as like a lightning resistance unit and potentially some other types of resistance units. Halloween Frederica isn't a unit that I know a lot about. She is, of course, a Halloween unit. She is a duelist like Chunok, and she's kind of like a semi-evasion unit. I think she's also a bit of a critical unit, and I mean, she's okay on paper, but really, if you're going for this flavor of a limited Earth unit, I would probably prefer Resnick the Hoppy in most cases. But again, I'm not necessarily the person to ask because I've never really been able to play around with this unit. Oberon is kind of like the OG, I'm going to do a whole hell of a lot of damage and there's not much you're going to be able to do about it units. He is interesting for rainbow teams potentially because his LB is a 20% all elemental resistance break, so he can break even for other elements, which is pretty helpful for him. He also has at least one move that got upgraded into his dream ability that has guaranteed hit, but he's one of, like, something I explain more in other videos is that this can help. This can support in an anti-evasion setup, but if you're expecting one guaranteed hit move to carry you through an evasion fight, especially a single target one, it's just not gonna. Although it does have piercing, so theoretically it can hit multiple units, but it's not a thing you should rely on. Moraga is a free unit through the selection quests. That's going to be kind of difficult for newer players to really do and get him up to 120, but he is going to be one of the first ones to get a 140 as well, and it's actually quite good. A big part of what makes his 140 playable though is you also have to get the helmet unlocked, and that can be pretty difficult. I'm even struggling with getting it fully unlocked. The one benefit to his 140 though is with these guys it's going to be pretty much completely free. I think you're going to be able to get a lot of the materials, save maybe prisms and scrolls for them. And you can also use the Dark Selection quest to farm a lot of those materials because Earth and Dark are going to be interchangeable. They're going to like do dual element things and release them two at a time in that way. So the Dark Selection quest being easy means that kind of long game, because you got to get through the 120 era selection quest to really get the helm, but long game he's actually pretty easy to build because of that synergy with Dark, and Dark being the easiest selection quest to beat, mainly because of Shadow Links. Summer Lilith is kind of like the Earth inverse of her normal form, in that in her normal form she is a ranger sub, and in this she is a ranger main, so she is a really explosive ranged unit. She's pretty fast, and in memory she lends herself to being evasive. I often see her on evasion teams. I saw her get really popular again. Not really. Okay, relative to her popularity, I've never really seen her be what I would call popular. That does not mean she's a bad unit, and she seems to work pretty well with evasion teams, though I wouldn't necessarily say that she's an evasion unit herself. It could just be that they get out front and that keeps her relatively safer in the back and allows her to just wreck stuff and do her thing. The unit, maybe that she I don't want to make comparisons to other archers because they don't have Setia either, but that's kind of who she feels like for me sometimes. Zazan the Unkillable is notable for being one of the only units that kind of natively in their kit can get re-raise and courage, really going into that unkillable thing. He also has really ridiculous, I mean, okay, not the most crazy this day and age, but pretty ridiculous base evasion and evasion potential. He's also incredibly lucky, which feeds into evasion. and that also feeds into accuracy, so you can potentially build him to be fairly accurate, but not necessarily a high accuracy unit. He also has a lot of, like, just kind of cruel debuffs and a ton of movement. Like, this guy is fast, and he gets across all ranges of maps very quickly, in that he kind of has that ninja mode, which I'm going to talk about with once we get to Katone, because she's a good partner for him, I think, in that she is also incredibly mobile across maps. Let's see. He also has some CT manipulation shenanigans that I think make him a potentially good partner with Bradley in terms of just having a really fast team and keeping the tempo up. He's also a really selfish unit in that he doesn't have any partner buffs unless you give him some, so he will typically just charge straight across the map, which means he's not really going to participate in buff patterns again unless you give him a TMR buff that's going to encourage him to buff with allies, and that's going to keep him in place for allies to buff him, which can be pretty helpful for his AI and kind of a hack to fixing it. If you're annoyed with him running off, sometimes him running off and charging straight into battle is exactly what you want him to do, so it's fine. Luelle is a scholar. Scholars are... She was the first scholar, and she's kind of a stereotypical scholar in that she's got solid defense, like a lot of Earth units, which is kind of their theme in general, and casting time reductions. She has a very powerful AoE magic-based strike attack, which I believe is the, if not one of the only magic-based strike attacks in the game. It's really good at getting around resistances because most units either don't resist strike or have negative resistances to strike, and there also aren't any good ways necessarily, or for the most part, to build strike resistance at this point. Speaking, but she's also going to be a magic damage dealer as well. Speaking of strike units, we've got Winter Venera. Don't see her very much. She is a bit of an older unit. I think she's somewhere between an older evasion unit, and I think she has some potential to, it's like either magic attack resistance she can build for, maybe spirit. I remember there being a version of her that was very good against those things before the penetrations got more common, and before evasion kind of got stepped on in the meta. I'm not saying that there isn't a team that could make her good, especially with the rise of the strike meta. Like, she could be, I don't want to say a poor man's Uriel, because she's probably harder to pull than Uriel, even though she is kind of an older unit, but she could kind of fit a similar role as Uriel or even Etra. Laval is going to be our first MR unit. She is a main job black mage, and her thing is poison, which is pretty fitting for her character in the story, in that she's... No, wait. I'm thinking of Mariel. Mariel's a fucking evil, evil character in the story. But she also has a Arithmetician sub, which is good for PvP. This is also the sub-job that I pointed out with Queen Macherie, having the big area of effect heals that are instant, and also big area of effect attacks that are also instant, and do both of these get bonus modifiers in certain cases. Not that you're really going to rely on that, but having a big instant heal the size of a Curaga is pretty cool. Though again, she's more of an offensive unit, so she's not necessarily going to be using that either. Halloween Raryu is not a unit that I recommend. He's a Rune Knight, so he's kind of like the Earth version of Howlet. I know that, damn it. So it's going to be like a magical swordsman with chances to get some penetrations, but also kind of into the hazard skills that reduce your HP, which has always made me like, they're also pretty fragile. Like, they're not tanky at all, so they're very glass cannon-y. The one saving grace for Halloween Raryu is his TMR, which gives re-raise, which he needs quite a bit, but arguably I wouldn't say he's a great unit, so use it on someone else. I think he's kind of evasive, but again, just I have him but didn't build him, don't see the point. Too hard to build, don't want to do it. But I did get his TMR just to give a unit re-raise, like it on Katone. Mustadio, I believe, is a gunner. He's got some status in his kit. The one, I think I've seen him once in a fight, and good lord, the statuses he inflicted on me before I could get in range of him were ridiculous. It didn't matter that he was an MR unit, he was one of the most impactful units on the field. He's not amazing, and I don't expect FFT to come back anytime soon, but if you're looking for kind of an MR version of Rugia, Mystadio is probably your boy. Killfabe was one of my first favorite units in this game. She is a bit old, her bones are a bit creaky, and that, geez, she came out after Katone in terms of UR units, so, yeep. There's a bit of a commit. You have to commit to Killfabe. The reason I say that is because really the thing that makes her a good unit in this day and age is her 120 skill. Getting that buff off at the beginning of the fight really turns her from kind of an old style unit into a new or modern unit, if not great. And it just keeps getting stronger at this point. It also, it gives her a bunch of defensive stuff. It gives her a bunch of offensive stuff. It gives her also, at this point, damage absorb. She's a lot like Luelle, except that her sub-jobs are a little bit more Swiss Army knife-esque, in that she has a sub-job that can make her into a tank, give her the ability to generate hate with an offensive skill, but also give her magic resistance, because she is a more versus physical unit, as most of the tankier or brawlier or weird Earth units tend to be. So she can be built to be, she could be built to be pretty tanky. This day and age, she doesn't really cut it as a tank, but she does make a decent brawler, especially with the ability to heal herself by attacking being added into her kit. She also has a guaranteed hit 9-space big damage, instant damage move in Energy Buster, which can absolutely wreck face. Especially Evasion's face, but let's be honest, it hurts when it hits anybody. Durando is an axe unit. There's not a lot of uses for axe units in the game, and honestly, axe jobs aren't amazing. There's probably something that makes him pretty cool, because to be honest, most MR at this point, especially with Reincarnation kind of leveling the playing field just a little bit for some of the lower rarity units, usually MR units are pretty good, or they have a relatively broad niche, not as broad as UR units, and usually you just get more niche as you go lower, if not necessarily less powerful in particular, because there's a lot of lower rarity units that, if used in the right situation with the right strategy, are incredibly effective if they are really invested in with the reincarnation system. I guess this guy's brawlery, maybe he has a lot of HP, not really sure. UR Katone is, there's two UR Katones actually. I don't know why I said UR Katone. Just because we're switching back in rarity to a UR unit. She is a bit older. She is a ninja. She has a lot of movement, a lot of jump. She has a passive that can increase both of those by 1. So if you really want somebody who can move across the field really quickly, she's your girl. She's also a lot like Zazan the Unkillable in a couple of other ways. She has automatic courage, which is kind of undispellable. Although if she drops below 70% HP, she effectively no longer has courage, so you can kind of just dispel it by hitting her. But importantly, one interaction that is favored for this is like Sephiroth's Limit Break. It will say that it removes courage, but her courage will still proc, because when she took damage, Anyways, it just can't remove it like that, because it removes it before damage, and then the game checks and she still has over 70% HP, so it's like, okay, she still has courage. And Sephiroth's just like, she's probably the most evasive Earth unit, or has the potential to be built as the most evasive Earth unit. I think maybe she kinda is. I think Zazan has a little bit more potential than her, but she also has better evasion buffs, I think, than him. If you really commit to her 140, you can push her HP up to something that's fairly reasonable. She is a tiny, tiny girl. This gets emphasized in story sometimes. She's probably about 18 by now. The story's been going on for a while. but this is probably based on her 16-year-old form, so not a lot of HP pool makes sense. She has grown up a bit, so she gets more HP now, which is important for Drain Force. Now, Drain Force is a skill that just requires its own video, but the basics are that you want to have as much HP as possible, and you also want to have as much Man-Eater as possible to do as much damage as you can. She doesn't necessarily have the highest HP pool, even with Reincarnation, but it certainly does make it better, and the fact that most units have a lot of trouble hitting her, maybe think of her as comparable to Yuffie without the avoid sure hit gimmick. And the fact that she can heal herself up, although in my experience, typically not enough to get her back above that 70% threshold in one hit, to re-proc her courage essentially, and Earth is kind of a hard unit to find a healer for her. I'm sure Killfake could probably help quite a bit. Maybe they would be a good combo and a good way to use some older Earth units to a really good effect. Etra is the Earth MR unit, so you can think of her as kind of like the MR version of Winter Venera or Uriel. She is a monk as her main job, and with recent upgrades, monk is interesting as being, at least in a strike-centric team, one of the only jobs that has heals. Their heals aren't based on their magic stat, which is good because they don't really have much of one. It is instead fixed percentages. Their AoE heal comes with regen, which is going to be 10% per turn for 3 turns. And additionally, they do have a revive skill that is somewhere between raise and full life and potency. It's not bad, it's not the best, it's not the worst, essentially. Being able to bring someone back to life is generally better than not having that ability. And one of the interesting things about strike units, or monks specifically, is that it can be easier for them to apply some of these support skills because they have typically short range on their other skills, being, strike units. Eileen. So Eileen was kind of Oberon before Oberon was Oberon, in that she was a lance unit that did a lot of damage and also potentially had Drain Force, so she could do some of the Katone stuff. I think she had even less HP than Katone potentially, so she wasn't good at that, and she also isn't evasive, and not being evasive, not having a lot of HP, not really having defensive stats, it becomes a little bit irrelevant if you hit like a Mack truck when you go down to a stiff breeze. Seriously, one of the most defensively limited UR units in the game, but theoretically she does put out some heavy damage, and I think with her 148 in Dream Reincarnation, she does have the potential to be a really good damage unit again. And, interestingly enough, she's also getting that after we're getting Dialdo, which is going to give Earth a really competent modern tank, which is going to keep her safer, maybe give her more turns to do that big damage. Which might make her okay, but I still think that your teams with her are going to be kind of unreliable just because, again, falling to a stiff breeze. But it is worth mentioning also that Dialdo is a magic pierce unit, and she is a physical pierce unit, so they can at least chain with their damage type. Speaking of chaining with the damage type, we have another Lancer here in Lorenzo. He can be pretty cool in the Earth selection quest. He's not necessarily an EMR that I would build for PvP or that I would prioritize building necessarily, but in the selection quest specifically, he has the ability to break AP for certain bosses, which can be a really good way of making sure that they don't use the move that you can't really deal with. Mont Leonis. I'm not explaining Mont. You have Mont. You should build Mont. Mont's completely free. Just do it. Murmur is a black mage. She does have access to some good poison. I think she also had, or maybe she's a red mage. I forget. No, she's a red mage because she's got the sword. Yeah. So she's a red mage main. I think she has the ability to break spirit, remove, re-raise, jamming thrust, pretty effective skill. I think she has a big area of effect in her black mage. She's pretty useful in selection quests, but not necessarily a unit I would use outside of that. She has a lot of, she's more of a thinking man's unit, I would say, and probably in PvP, I would say like limited manual, she would do a lot better in, but I wouldn't advise her too much outside of that. Balo is the roundest boy in the game. I'm not sure that he stands out too much in any other way. When he does get a 140, though, he is going to get access to the most the most incredibly, staggeringly overpowered re-raise skill you have ever seen. I cannot exaggerate this enough, because Balo isn't great, but which is why I think they were so confident in giving him a skill that is so incredibly broken, or would be on any other unit. On him, it makes him worth building, but not broken. He will be interesting, especially in limited content, and I think, if I remember correctly, he has really good potential for evasion, too, which is interesting. He's also potentially a tank for you, for your limited cost stuff. And like a lot of limited cost units, like a lot of limited cost tanks specifically, he gets a lot out of reincarnation, because that can really make up for having kind of a limited HP pool to begin with, as he is a lower rarity character. Because I think tanks relatively get about the same amount of HP no matter what the rarity is from reincarnation. So it's a big equalizer for them. So the 140 is going to be big for him, but I still don't necessarily think he gets played much outside of limited. So I don't know if you would call, like 26 minutes quick, but hey, that's all the Earth units that are in the game so far. So tune into the next one. We're going to be talking about, well, like Earth, Wind, and Fire. Okay, sounds like a good first set to start with. Well, actually, you know what? Clickbait dictates that I do dark. You gotta get that Sephiroth on a thumbnail. Alright, I guess that's the next one. See you in the dark video.